but there is some significant off-ice news happening, or off-ice stories to track with the Edmonton Oilers is a good way to put it. Frank Seravalli was all over it yesterday. Let's get to the Star Mechanical guest line for Edmonton's #1 plumbing and heating company and head out to Philadelphia, where Frank Seravalli is out of the rain that existed in Seattle and back home in PA. Frank, Philip Broberg, that certainly took a bit of a turn. What's the latest between him and the Oilers?
Yeah, I don't think there's any turn.
No, I just meant like a week ago, we were sitting here being like, Jack Campbell, and like that was it. Then all of a sudden yesterday you hit us with Broberg searching for a trade. Like it kind of, at least from my perspective, came out of nowhere.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of frustration that's been bubbling there. I mean, just look at his games played the last, season and a half. It's a lot of healthy scratches that are mixed in. You see a player who obviously is young, was highly touted, has a lot of talent, but has had a crisis of confidence, I think, as a result. And so then now you're on to your second coaching staff who clearly doesn't have trust in him. And more than that, the Oilers are in a spot where every game matters. Every night matters. They can't afford to give Philip Broberg the rope or opportunity now to try and find his game again. It's not a fishing expedition. And that's the spot that they're in, is they're not really able to accommodate what he needs at this exact moment in time. And he's kind of frustrated and is saying, I'd like to get a change of scenery here. I'd like to mix it up.
Looking at a guy who hasn't even played 100 NHL games, never mind, hasn't had a ton of success in those NHL games. And granted, maybe a bit of a chicken and egg debate. We talked about this yesterday with Gazdick, and he told the story about his relationship with McClellan, where he was like, hey, I understand you want more ice time, but if you played better, I would give you more ice time. And I feel like that's almost similar to this Broberg thing, where like Vinny Desharnais came in and grabbed that third pairing spot by the horns and really hasn't let go. We've never seen a stretch like that from Philip Broberg. So with all that in mind, Frank, what's his value? Like, are there teams interested in this guy? Like, we saw the Sens put Lassie Thompson on waivers earlier this year, and he was taking 10 picks after Broberg.
Yeah, I mean, are there teams interested? Yes, there are. The issue for the Oilers is they're not looking for picks. They don't want futures back. They'd like to get a player that they can use in their lineup. And that part, when you consider the cap situation that the Oilers have, having to move dollars in and dollars out, is not going to be easy, let alone to find someone that the Oilers would find some value in that's in a similarly maligned position. It's not an easy transaction to make, and that's really what they're looking at. Does he have value? Yeah, he does. Because I think the real story about Broberg is, unlike some players that are in this spot, it's not that he's been tested necessarily and failed. It's more so that there's the unknown, and that cuts both ways for teams that are interested. The reports have been really mixed. And going back to your chicken and egg point, in talking to other GMs around the league, they're like, I'm looking through my reports on Philip Broberg, and some are good and some are really not good. And I chalk that up to a guy that has really struggled to find a consistent spot in the lineup where every mistake that you make isn't hanging over your head. And that part is hard.
I think the interesting thing with Broberg is when he's had the opportunity, he's like made a mistake and he's just fallen off a cliff a little bit from there. But I wanted to ask you, Frank, about the development of Oilers prospects. Like, it's not like there's a pipeline coming through now, right? And this is another first-round pick that's struggling to make any impact. Like, should the Oilers be worried about where they're at in the development sense of things?
Yeah, I think not only worried from that perspective, in that, like, if you're talking about opportunity, like, he should be getting opportunity somewhere for the Oilers, which is a huge part of it. And then the other part is an asset management question that I think is a really significant one to ask. Should the Oilers be in a spot, given where they are cap-wise, that Brett Kulak is eating those minutes that Philip Broberg could be? Like, wouldn't you rather... what Brett Kulak is, and he's really struggled at times this season. And, like, wouldn't you rather move Brett Kulak and get a return on him, which you can get, and then solve the question and answer it for yourself about Philip Broberg, versus keeping Kulak, the known commodity who makes a lot more, and then finding out with Philip Broberg somewhere else that he's actually pretty good.
With Brett Kulak on the ice this season at 5-on-5, the Oilers have been outscored 19-11. That's the exact same number as Philip Broberg. Both are 19-11 at 5-on-5.
How old's Kolek now? Like 30?
29.
29?
I mean, that's is the drop-off you'd get from a Kulak to a Broberg. $2 million in savings you're getting with that as well. Like that's
my point. $2 million in savings plus then exhausting your development and growth factor at a time when you need players on cheap deals contributing to your team and answering the question of, hey, maybe do we have something here that's better than we think it could be?
Yeah. And the thing, just on that too, on the forward group, you look at a guy like Raphael Lavoie, who's played 7 games now this season, but instead the Oilers are choosing to go with a veteran guy like Adam Ernie. It's like, well, the upside is there with the Broberg, Lavoie over these veteran guys like a Kulak, I suppose, or an Adam Ernie or a Gagne. I'm not saying they're not playing well, but you have a better chance of getting more out of those guys than what they get him out of everybody else right now.
I think I agree with what you're saying, and I understand your premise. But the reality is that clearly the Oilers and their coaching staff doesn't see it the same way. And maybe that's all that matters is they find a lot more comfort in those guys than the question mark guys.
Well, the NHL is not a developmental league, right? It goes back to that.
So but sometimes good teams
is spending his whole time in the AHL.
Yeah, but sometimes good teams find ways to squeeze these guys in and give them their experience, right? Like, I mean, is this, and I love this tweet from Bruce McCurdy yesterday, but like, these are the Ken Holland draft picks. I mean, Dylan Holloway last season played how many games? Half the season, 41, 50 games. How many of those games did he play like 4 minutes? Like at some point, you're just spinning your tires. And like Frank said, there's a cap element to it. As much as the NHL is not a developmental league, man, if Raph Lavoie and Dylan Holloway were both bona fide top 9 guys this year on their ELCs, maybe, and if you would have known that or had confidence in that coming into the year, maybe you don't give Connor Brown that contract. Maybe you don't feel the need to do that, right? Like, as much as it's not a developmental league, Frank, you do need guys chipping in on their ELCs. Dallas has Wyatt Johnson scoring 20 goals for dirt cheap.
100%. And here's the thing. I think without really getting into all that played out yesterday, and there was certainly some happening behind the scenes, I think that's been a point of frustration from the management side of things that I think the way Philip Broberg was handled was a significant negative check mark against Jay Woodcroft as part of everything that had gone on leading up to his dismissal. It's not, the big reason why he's not here anymore, but I think there's certainly a facet of management. Look at the draft record that they wanted to see some more opportunity and more consistent play to take the heat. Liam, you just hit it on the head. You see him make a mistake and he falls off a cliff. Well, if you know that you're going to be out of the lineup if you make a mistake, you're way more likely to make one. And so you have to give guys runway. And the problem for the Oilers is they've started poorly. Last year they had tough stretches. Again, they were in a dogfight in the standings in January. They've had stretches where they can't just provide runway to players. They've had to have people that they rely on and trust a lot more instead of trying to build and find that trust. And I think it's still a negative check mark for Jay Woodcroft.
All right. This was a very good conversation. We went way longer on Broberg than I thought we would, but it really does kind of poke holes in some organizational deficiencies, I think. But Jack Campbell, I mean, we're talking about how you need cheap players on your roster. The Oilers have an expensive player not on their roster in Jack Campbell. We thought for a moment there after those 3 good American League games that, hey, maybe they look to bring him back. And then the game against Texas happens. He's going viral for all the wrong reasons. We had Gazdig on yesterday, and he's like, dude, you sit and watch Hockey Night in Canada on a Saturday night. The Oilers aren't even playing, and they're showing Jack Campbell highlights. Like, it's frustrating from the perspective of he just can't seem to get things back on the rails. I don't think they can trust him at the NHL level right now. Do you think Oilers management believes they can trust him at the NHL level?
I think they're skeptical, and I think think about how close Jack Campbell was. Just get through that one game and you're probably back in the NHL. I'm not saying it's today because they would have had to lose a forward, and with the rest that Stuart Skinner just got, no real reason to bring him up at this exact moment in time. But get through that one game and you might change your fortunes a little bit. Now, I think they look at it and they say, oof, don't really want to find out the hard way. And more than that, they're in such a tough spot moving forward. I think they have to at least give him one more crack, because I think they have to exhaust and leave that question answered, so that when they go out and make a move and move his salary somewhere else, they know that they're getting something back that they can really rely on.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you need to give him one more crack. It just can't come when you're sitting 30th place in the NHL. Like, that's why I said last week, you got to wait till later in December. You can probably trust Pickard for a game or two if you want to play him against Chicago or whatever, but you probably got to wait. I thought Liam made an excellent point, though, last week about getting out of his cap ahead of the deadline. It's in a way, Frank, it could be double dipping if they can clear out Campbell's salary and sit. And I know this maybe isn't ideal, but have like $3 million in cap space at the end of the season. Connor Brown's bonus doesn't hurt them as much next year. And all of a sudden, getting out from Campbell this year, if you don't spend the money immediately, it's parlayed into like an extra $8 million in cap space next year with the Brown bonus and Campbell off the books.
I get what you're saying, but I'd be shocked if they ended the year with any cap space.
Okay.
This is not a year. And if you're getting into the playoffs or you're making a run, you're not leaving any stone unturned. This is a burn the boats type of year for the Edmonton Oilers. I don't think they're sitting here going, oh, well, maybe we should look ahead to next year and not have an overage. The whole design with Connor Brown was everyone knew the cap was going up for next year, and you could afford essentially to eat into next year's increase by virtue of not having one this year with Brown. And so that was part of the thought process. And now I think it's of paramount importance, if you don't trust Jack Campbell, that you have to pay the significant price to move him somewhere else to then be able to fill other spots on your roster, which certainly will need upgrades.
Yeah, that's the other thing too, is like getting out of Campbell's one layer, upgrading the goaltending's one layer, but you need help in the bottom six. You might want to upgrade the right side of your blue line because you're an injury away from that looking real thin. So
it just feels like there's so many options for them to actually like move a little bit of money and get creative with it. Like if you
Fogel's on the trade targets board.
Like Fogel's on your board. Like if you move Fogel, there's an option for you to get maybe two bottom six players, right? That can play a role there. And I just hope the Oilers are thinking that way as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, not only that, but I would say the other thing is they have to get aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
I'm writing a story for Daily Faceoff for Friday in which I say Patrick Allvin is the front runner for GM of the year. Why? Because he's made 5 out of the last 8 trades in the NHL. Look at the Canucks and look at how they've passed the Oilers. Don't sit here and tell me how hard it is to make a trade when someone is out here moving $4 million in cap space. You can do it. You've got to make calls. You've got to be willing to be aggressive. You've got to get out there and not have it look so complete in the meantime. You know, they find a fortuitous spot in the Chicago Blackhawks for Anthony Beauvillier after Taylor Hall goes down for the season. They have Corey Perry's contract terminated and they pounce. Then they turn around and take that cap space and trade for Nikita Zadorov. The Vancouver Canucks have changed out 4 of their 6 defensemen in the last 9 months.
And even on top of that,
don't tell me it can't be done.
Like, look at Rob Blake in the same division. And then you have Kelly McCrimmon, is that his name, with Vegas? Like, you have the top 3 teams in the division being aggressive at whenever they can be to make their team better. And then you have Ken Holland just sat on his hands, not doing anything at the moment, whilst the Oilers are, 29th in the NHL?
Kelly McCrimmon's a stone cold killer in Vegas. The LA Kings have depth coming out the wazoo. Like, think about Quentin Byfield. I think, and we talked about this today on Daily Faceoff Live, me and Tyler, the idea that if you were to tell me right now the Kings are the best team in the West, I don't know that I could argue you out of that. And then to think that Byfield is now exploding and they have Brant Clark playing in the minors. They're locked and loaded for the next 10 years. And it's because they've drafted well, they've developed well, they've got a good coach, they've made big bets. You've got to go all in, and I think the Oilers have been a little complacent.
Yes.
Patrick Alvin, GM of the year, Todd McClellan, coach of the year, all happening in the Pacific Division. Things are going well. Okay, Frank, fair or foul for your last one? This 6-game homestand will define the Oilers' season.
Who do they play?
Carolina, Minnesota, New Jersey, Chicago, Tampa, Florida.
Probably foul. I told you that they need to get to 41 points in 41 games by the halfway mark. I think they're going to be well ahead of that. I'd say the stretch that will ultimately end up defining their season is the one, sort of right after the coaching change. And they seem to have passed at this point. There's a long way to go, but if you had told me that they're playing teams directly above them in the standings, I would look at it a little bit differently, but with a lot of Eastern teams mixed in there, I don't know if it's quite as critical.
I lied about that being the last one. Can you give us a testimonial for people maybe considering joining us this year on how much fun the Jasper Pond Hockey Tournament is?
If you like a beautiful resort, if you like pond hockey, a cool and fun hot stove session with myself and the whole group, and plenty of beverages to go around. I mean, if you don't like those things, just don't come.
That's a good
That's
way
fair.
to put it.
Yeah.
Shout out to our friends at Tourism Jasper. Excited to be heading back in about 6 weeks' time. Frank, thanks for hopping on and doing this.
See you guys.
There you go,
Thanks, Frank.
Frank Seravalli on the Star Mechanical Guest Line, Edmonton's #1 plumbing and heating company, and it's been that way for over 20 years. The best in the business.